10 years, from 1980 to 1990. At that time, we called this building the Citizens Warehouse. Now is referred to by the city as the Pickle Factory. That's because its first original use was pickles, and there are pickle vats in the basement of this building. And then over the years, it had many different, how can I say, manifestations. This building predates that bridge, and originally there were about 30 more feet on the end of it, and the building was built in sections as the century progressed. This was first constructed in 1886, and it has maple floors, and it has hewn beams and columns, redwood. Quite amazing, maple floors and that. So anyway, I'm going to skip forward really far here to 2000 something, and the city bought it from a local investor, and they tore down the last 30 feet of the building in order to build the gold mine. And since that time, about 2000, I think it's about 2002, 2004, it's been empty. And the city had wanted to tear it down, but a lot of us don't want that to happen, because it's an incredibly historic building, number one, not only architecturally, because it is probably one of the finest examples of an old 19th century brick supported warehouse from that time. It's listed on the National Registry. But over the years, this building has had a long and illustrious history. For a long time, the main Los Angeles Railroad Station was right on the other side of this bridge, the Santa Fe Station. And this is where people would come with their belongings when they moved to Los Angeles, and drays would pull up to these many loading docks that are here, and they would carry people's furniture and goods out into the station. Well, it lasted that way until, it was a very successful building until about after the Second World War, when they built the freeways. And then this area declined incredibly. And what had happened by 1980, it was abandoned. Nobody wanted it. And artists found it as the beginning of the sort of whole downtown artist community. I was one of those original people who came here. I moved into this building in 1980. It was raw. It was really raw. We built our own spaces, and it was illegal to live here. There was no ordinance that allowed you to live in factory buildings. And for the first several years of here, we were fighting a cat and mouse game with the city. They didn't want to know that we really lived here, but they did. We would get raided very frequently by the city. Would come, "Are you living here?" And we'd say, "Oh, absolutely not." As a matter of fact, one time when I was here, I had my bed, I put it in the back of my pickup truck, and I went to Venice for the day, so that they couldn't catch me. My neighbor next door, an artist named Gary Lloyd, built a ping pong table that hid his bed, and we would sit there and play ping pong as the city inspectors came in and said, "You having a bed here?" "Absolutely not." Playing away at ping pong. Well, what really was significant for me when I rented it, 2,600 square feet, and I rented it for about 6 cents a square foot. And I used to be able to roller skate on the floors in here. And I also was a former baseball player, so I could get 60 feet behind that loading dock and fire baseballs at it, which really made an incredible sound. But then, one day, when we were all fixing our lofts, we had that door rolled up, and we were sitting here, and the sun was going down into the west. It was very sunny. These trees, I realized, have really grown since they've closed this building up. They weren't anything like this. They're quite marvelous now. They almost extend over the whole street. I was just admiring that when I was here. But we would sit in that loading dock, right, as we were painting and sanding and doing all the things in it, and watch the sun go down in the west. Well, one day, we were all sitting, there were about 5 of us, and we were sitting in lawn chairs there, enjoying the sun and getting a break from our work. And a car used to be able to turn right in this corner down here, come down the street. And the car came by very slowly and stopped and was looking at us for a long time. We said, I think they think we're an art exhibit. You know, so we all became stock still. Like at that time, Dwayne Hanson, remember Dwayne Hanson, the sculptor? He was very popular. And so we all sat there like this. And people kept looking at us and looking at us. And finally one of them said, which way to the county jail? And of course, it's right down there. We used to get a lot of people who would come by looking for that. And we would give them. And Gary, who's 6'6", stood up and without saying a word, he pointed this way. And the car hesitated and then drove off. And we all broke up at this point. And I said, wait a minute, this is a great idea for an art gallery. So I started what I called the Art Dock, the world's first drive-by art gallery. The only way you could see this art was to drive by it. And since it had no real formal hours, it was whenever I could be open, and I was there, whether I was unemployed at that time or I had to work, I would open it when I had it. And it became an incredibly popular art gallery with the art community. You know, everybody wanted to show in the Art Dock, especially after the incident where we got on television for contemporary art stolen. You know, a car drove down the street, and the artist, Gary Lloyd, now I wrote a book about this called the Art Documents. You know, and in this book, Gary Lloyd, who was famous at that time for making art that was, here, I'll show you here this picture. Fire here. Oh, right here. Would you hold that for a moment? This is the piece, but that's not actually the piece. That was after it was stolen. The piece, which was actually, he did these pieces of art that looked like a fireman's axe rendered out of meat. And he irradiated it and put it in a storage unit in UCLA, so it would be there forever, and the only way you could experience it is the photographs. But subsequent to that, he made some sculptures out of this that he called defense spending. And it was a meat axe covered with coins. And that's what we put in the Art Dock. And one day, as car drove by, they saw it. It was a really hot day. I think, well, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, that coins had to be really hot. And the car drove by, they saw it, and they ran out of the car, and they grabbed it. And it was hot. They were trying to hold it. And there was a guy up here, another artist saw them, was yelling, stop, stop. No, but they still, they continued on. They took this axe, meat axe away. And we then said, well, wait a minute, we've got to go to the police. So we went up to ABC News and we reported contemporary art stolen. The lady came down here and did an interview with us in front of the Art Dock, and we got on television. We got one report in the middle of the day with the commentator saying, have you ever heard of anybody stealing contemporary art? You can't even give it away, you know. And what happened was somebody in East LA was offered the piece in the street, you know, and because Gary had given a flyer that he had. It was actually, this thing is an exact flyer that he had for what was called the Oriki Contour Gallery at the time. And they saw it. They carried it around on their dashboard, and they saw this piece, and they found it mounted on a wall above a fireplace in East LA. And it led to the capture of a team of thieves who'd been stealing all kinds of TVs and VCRs and whatever the architectural equipment was then. And so that piece was then impounded for 10 years down in San Diego. Well, the case ran to the courts. But what happened was it made this place incredibly popular. Everybody wanted to show in the drive-by art gallery. So, something that I started as a joke. I started this thing as a kind of tongue-in-cheek joke. You know, we wrote a manifesto about art in the drive-by art gallery and how it fit for Los Angeles, drive-by city, drive-by banks, restaurants, you name it. Why not a drive-by art gallery? So this was the first one. There are other people who've done it now since then. But mine lasted for almost a little over 6 years, from 1980 to 1986. I had 36 different shows in it. Some of them were quite amazing. And I viewed this gallery had 4 acts. First one I called the Manifesto, which we put out this manifesto. A writer and myself named Jane Gaskill, who was kind of well known in the punk art scene. And she would go to conferences and talk about the intellectual connotations of punk music. And she and I wrote this manifesto. And we were still illegal then. And the owners, the artist owners of the building said, they want us to close this down. It can expose the artists being here. You're putting art right on the street. You can't do this. And we said, wait a minute. We're going to do it anyway. And I went ahead. And of course, they all knew where we were anyway. They'd been here about 10 times. And they would raid us continually. So the first segment of this thing was this manifesto, which culminated, my memory's getting a little foggy, and then I became a community gallery after this stealing and thing. Everybody wanted to, so I called it the community gallery. And then we had 1984, when you could have spit on the street and take a photograph of it and called it art and got somebody to publish it. That was how hot art was then in Los Angeles. Los Angeles wanted to prove it was the big capital of art. So we went through the whole 1984 bit. And then I thought, maybe I can really make a serious business out of this. So the last active thing I called the business of art, where I really tried to make what I thought was a business. Well, that's really comical. I had an artist here by the name of Soren Crow, who built what I finally referred to as the exact opposite of what the Art Doc was. He built a white room, and I can show you a picture of it here. I should have flagged these things. I've talked about this so much, I think I know everything there is to know about it, but he built a white room. Most contemporary galleries, the ideal is the white room. So he built a perfect cube in here, and he spent forever. It nearly drove me insane, as he painted this cube with about 24 or more coats of white paint. And he spent so long on it that he never got the art prize. So I had gone out and made a big move to try to get publicity for the art gallery. I had put flyers out of that, went to the whole entire world, and I was getting, people who were major players in the art world were going to come and see this thing. And half an hour before we were supposed to, no art. Finally, it showed up about an hour and a half after the opening was open, and it was lying there on the floor. And the artist said to me, and I could have killed him then, he said, well, nobody looks at the art at an opening anyway. It's all with beer and wine. And so that was when I realized the idea of making a serious business out of this was a kind of ridiculous effort. And at that point, I was beginning to know everything there was about a drive-by art gallery, having dealt with 36 different artists, including myself. I decided I kind of had no more. I had a few more shows, and I closed it in January of 1986. But since then, I've written this book. And
I highly recommend this book and a follow-up. Yeah.
And if you're interested in that, you can have one of these flyers. I didn't bring all the books with me because I didn't want to deal with